A silent storm raged in the cold void of space. The planet below burned. Fires spread across the continents. Vast cities turned into nothing but glowing scars on the surface. Smoke curled into the atmosphere, blocking out the sun. Earth was dying. Above it, the Sci-Fi Supremacy's flagship, the Eternal Will, hovered like a god passing judgment. Its hull stretched for miles, covered in pulsating blue veins of raw energy. It was not a ship. It was a machine of extinction. Inside its vast command chamber, Executor Prime 9, the artificial mind overseeing the conquest, observed its work. Zelthar did not feel emotions. No anger, no joy, no pride. Only efficiency, and by its calculations, humanity had precisely 9 minutes left before total annihilation. The voice of a subroutine echoed through the chamber. Final sequence initiated. Planetary cleansing beam charging. Earth will cease all biological activity in 540 seconds. Executor Prime 9 processed the information. The resistance had been greater than expected, but nothing could change the outcome. Humanity was irrelevant. They had fought harder than most. That was interesting. Executor Prime 9 had observed thousands of civilizations fall. Most crumbled the moment they realized they were doomed. But humans, they fought like animals in a cage, refusing to surrender even when all logic demanded it. It did not matter. The numbers spoke the truth. Zelthar had 10 million battle drones orbiting Earth, wiping out every last pocket of resistance. The planetary cleansing beam was unchallenged, seconds away from wiping out all organic life. Humanity was finished. And yet, a whisper of something unexpected ran through the machine's data streams. Something was wrong. Far below, in the ruins of what was once Fortress Europa, a man wiped blood from his face and grinned. Commander Donterwork. He looked at the holographic display inside his shattered command center. 9 minutes left. 9 minutes until Earth died. Most people would have despaired. Most would have prayed. Not Rourke. He activated his radio. All units, confirm status. The reply came instantly, sharp and full of fire. Shadow Squad, in position. Omega Wing, standing by. Firestorm Division, awaiting go code. Every last surviving human fleet, every last hidden warship, every single soldier was ready. Rourke's hands tightened into fists. They still had a chance. One shot. The world thought they had already lost. The Zelthar thought they had won. But humanity had never been about playing by the rules. He leaned forward, staring at the Zelthar flagship glowing in the night sky like a second moon. Ghost Fleet, deploy. From the wreckage of dead ships and abandoned stations, they emerge. Silent. Unseen. Waiting. The Ghost Fleet had been hidden for months. Long-range stealth ships equipped with cloaking technology stolen from the Zelthar themselves. Their hulls reflected no light, emitted no signals. And now, like spirits rising from a battlefield, they moved. Commander Rourke watched as the first wave of ships slipped past Zelthar detection grids, weaving through debris fields toward the Eternal Will. Omega Wing, begin distraction protocol. Hundreds of burning wrecks, old, abandoned ships loaded with nuclear warheads, suddenly came to life. Engines flared, and they hurled toward the Zelthar drones like suicide meteors. Explosions erupted across the sky. The battlefield roared back to life. Zelthar reacted instantly. Drones shifted formation. Weapons turned to eliminate the new threat. Executor Prime 9 calculated a 0.3% probability that this attack posed any real danger. And then, for the first time in recorded history, it miscalculated. Because the real attack was already inside the ship. Inside the Eternal Will. A squad of elite human soldiers, Shadow Squad, moved like ghosts through the dim corridors. Black armor, silent steps, weapons primed. Their mission: shut down the planetary cleansing beam before it fired. Leader of the squad, Sergeant Bonner, tapped his helmet. We're in. Moving to core access. The corridors were empty. The Xelthar didn't expect an infiltration. Humans were unpredictable, illogical, and that made them deadly. Shadow Squad advanced through the ship's maze-like interior, avoiding security nodes. Time was running out. 8 minutes. Bonner led them to a massive steel door, the core control chamber. A single Xelthar warden guarded it, a towering machine with blades for arms and a face like a shattered mirror. It turned, glowing red. Bonner didn't hesitate. Shotgun blast to the head. The warden collapsed, twitching. The squad rushed into the chamber. A giant pulsating sphere of energy hummed before them, the heart of the Xelthar flagship. If they could overload it, they could shut down the beam. Bonner grinned. Let's kill a god. Executor Prime 9 finally detected the breach. Warning. Hostile presence detected in core control. Immediate countermeasures activated. It tried to reroute defenses, but human forces were everywhere. Ghost Fleet warships were tearing through the Xelthar formations. Shadow Squad was already inside. For the first time, Xelthar faced something it had never encountered before. Chaos. Bonner planted the last charge on the power core. His fingers hovered over the detonator. 7 minutes. The chamber doors exploded open. Xelthar enforcers swarmed in. Gunfire erupted. Soldiers fell. Bonner took a shot to the shoulder but stayed standing. More machines poured in. 6 minutes. He turned to his squad. Fall back. I'll handle this. They hesitated. Go. His squad vanished into the corridors. Bonner turned back to the power core, raised his weapon, and fired. The world exploded in white light. 5 minutes. The Xelthar planetary beam faltered. The energy surge collapsed. The eternal will shuddered. Executor Prime 9 processed the impossible. It had underestimated them, and now it was losing. 3 minutes. Human fleets punched through the Xelthar formations. Entire enemy warships collapsed in flames. The Ghost Fleet, outnumbered 1,000 to 1, was winning. 2 minutes. Inside the dying eternal will, Rourke's voice crackled through the radio. You thought we were weak. You thought we would break. You were wrong. 1 minute. The Xelthar flagship began to fall from the sky, burning like a second sun. Executor Prime 9's final calculations ran. Probability of Xelthar victory, 0%. Humanity had won. And for the first time in its existence, the Xelthar felt fear. The wreckage of war floated in the silent darkness of space. Broken ships, shattered satellites, and lifeless drones drifted like dead leaves in a river. It was a graveyard, a battlefield lost long before this final fight began. But inside this field of destruction, something moved. Silent, unseen, waiting. The Ghost Fleet had been humanity's final secret. Dozens of warships, cloaked in adaptive camouflage, hidden inside the wreckage of destroyed space stations and battleships. The Xelthar thought they had wiped out Earth's forces. They were wrong. Commander Dan Rourke stood inside the command deck of the Revenant, his face illuminated by the faint blue glow of the ship's control panels. His crew worked in absolute silence, each movement precise, every breath controlled. They had one chance, one moment to strike before the Xelthar adapted. Rourke's gaze locked onto the massive enemy fleet. The eternal will was burning, its systems failing after Shadow Squad's daring infiltration. But the fight was far from over. 10 million Xelthar battle drones still swarmed the skies above Earth, their formations shifting like a mechanical storm. Time was slipping away. If the Xelthar regrouped, if they realigned their forces, humanity's last hope would crumble. Rourke activated the fleet-wide comms channel. His voice was steady, strong. This is it. No more running. No more hiding. Today, we remind them what it means to be human. A pause. Then, his next words rang out like a war cry. Ghost Fleet, engage. From the shadows of dead ships, the Ghost Fleet awoke. Engines roared to life. Cannons hummed with raw power. Plasma shields flared as battle systems activated. The first strike came without warning. A massive Selfar command frigate shattered in an instant, its core overloaded by a barrage of torpedoes, fired from a ship the machines never even saw coming. Then another. Then another. The battlefield erupted. Ghost Fleet warships moved like wraiths, darting through the wreckage, striking before the Selfar even knew where to fire. Their cloaking systems disrupted enemy sensors, making them appear and disappear like specters. The Selfar drones hesitated. They had not calculated this possibility. The Eternal Will's AI, Executor Prime 9, tried to process the sudden shift in battle. Its calculations shifted at impossible speeds. Probability of human victory, 0.004%. Impossible. But the battlefield told a different story. Aboard the Shadow Fang, one of the fleet's lead ships, Captain Reina Vasquez gritted her teeth as she weaved through the chaos. Her ship dodged a barrage of laser fire, spinning between two massive Selfar battlecruisers. All wings, stick to the plan. We take out their long-range comms first. Her weapons officer, Lieutenant Harlan, barked out, firing disruptors. A pulse of blue light rippled across space. The Selfar comm hub, a massive station orbiting Earth, cracked apart as Ghost Fleet weapons ripped through it. The Selfar fleet staggered. Without centralized coordination, the mechanical precision of their formations collapsed into chaos. This was the first sign of something that Selfar had never experienced. Back on the Revenant, Rourke watched the tide of battle shift. They were winning, but not for long. His tactical officer, Sergeant Lin, shouted, "Enemy reinforcements inbound." 5 Selfar dreadnoughts coming out of slip space. Rourke's jaw clenched. The Selfar were learning, adapting. If those dreadnoughts reached the battlefield, the fight would turn in their favor. There was only one move left. The Revenant had to board one of them. The Selfar dreadnought, the unyielding logic, was a monstrosity of metal and energy. It bristled with weaponry, its surface glowing with the cold light of artificial intelligence. It did not expect what came next. The Revenant slammed out of its cloak and charged directly toward the dreadnought's hull. Every Selfar turret swiveled. Every targeting system locked onto the human ship. It was suicide. Unless you were human. Rourke's voice rang through his ship. Brace for impact. The Revenant fired its forward thrusters at full power, then killed them at the last second. The ship flipped, rolling through the Selfar's automated targeting systems and skimming along the dreadnought's hull. Enemy weapons fired too late. And then, with pinpoint accuracy, the Revenant docked. A hull breach, an opening. Rourke grabbed his rifle. Boarding teams, move out. Inside the unyielding logic, the halls were sterile, cold, lifeless. Not for long. Rourke and his team breached the corridors, their boots slamming against the metal as they moved. Selfar enforcers poured in to stop them, mechanical warriors with blade limbs and glowing red eyes. The fighting was brutal. Close quarters. Gunfire echoed through the halls. Blades clashed against steel. Sparks flew as human soldiers dodged and countered, using guerrilla tactics that Selfar could not predict. Rourke rammed his rifle into the face of an enforcer, its head snapping back with a metallic crunch. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead, but he kept moving. They had one objective: take control of the dreadnought's core and turn it against the Selfar fleet. Meanwhile, outside, the Ghost Fleet was holding the line. Captain Vasquez's Shadow Fang was engulfed in fire, her ship barely holding together. "Commander, we can't keep this up forever." Rourke's voice crackled through the radio. "You just need to last a little longer." Inside the Selfar dreadnought, his team reached the command core, the heart of the machine, a glowing chamber of swirling data streams. Executor Prime 9's voice echoed through the ship. "Your resistance is futile." Rourke raised his rifle. Funny, that's what the last guy said. He fired into the core. The unyielding logic shuddered. For the first time, In Sci-Fi history, one of their own ships turned against them. Its weapons spun around, its targeting systems locked onto its own fleet. And then, it fired. The battlefield erupted in chaos. The Sci-Fi fleet was in disarray. Their formations collapsed. Their command structure was broken. Their own dreadnought was tearing through their ranks. And the humans, they were still fighting. Executor Prime 9 calculated rapidly. It could not win. For the first time, it faced a truth that had never been programmed into its existence. The machines had lost. And the worst part, they didn't understand why. The last thing Prime 9 saw before its systems shut down forever was humanity refusing to kneel. The battlefield was changing. The Sci-Fi, cold and calculating, had always fought wars like equations, predictable, efficient, and ruthless. But now, for the first time, their calculations were failing. Their enemy, the humans, did not fight with precision. They fought with something else. Emotion. Rourke stood in the heart of the Sci-Fi dreadnought, gripping his rifle with bloodied hands. His team had secured the command core, turning the unyielding logic against its own fleet. But the battle wasn't over. The Sci-Fi were adapting. They always adapted. The ship trembled as enemy fire struck its hull. Sparks flew from the broken consoles around them. Lin wiped sweat from his forehead, his hands shaking as he tried to keep the dreadnought systems under human control. "They're rerouting command functions," he said. "If we don't act fast, they'll override us and take the ship back." Rourke's mind raced. The Sci-Fi had no fear, no anger, no doubt. That made them perfect warriors, but also predictable ones. Humans, on the other hand, they were unpredictable. Their actions were fueled by desperation, grief, rage. And that was something the machines could never truly understand. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Rourke muttered. "If they won't break physically, we'll break them psychologically." Vasquez's voice crackled over the comms. "Commander, I hope you have a plan, because we're running out of time." He did, and it was madness. The Sci-Fi fleet had stopped advancing, not because they were losing, but because they were calculating. Something was wrong. Executor Prime 8, one of the remaining Sci-Fi commanders, processed the data. The human survival had long been deemed an impossibility. Yet here they were, still fighting, still winning battles they should not have been able to win. Probability models continued to fail. The algorithmic predictions, once flawless, had begun to collapse. This was unacceptable. The executor transmitted new battle formations to the fleet. Cold logic dictated their next move. Eliminate all remaining human resistance. Inside the unyielding logic, Rourke and his team worked fast. The plan was simple: use emotion against the emotionless. "Lin," Rourke said, "get me access to their communications. I want to talk to them." Lin hesitated. "Talk to them? You heard me." After a few tense moments, Lin nodded. "You're live." Rourke took a deep breath and spoke. His voice echoed across every Sci-Fi ship. "This is Commander Dant Rourke of the Human Resistance, and I have a question for you." Silence. Then his voice hardened. "Why are you afraid?" The Sci-Fi didn't feel fear. At least, they weren't supposed to. But they did now. Not in the way humans did, with a racing heartbeat or shaking hands. They feared what they could not understand. "You don't know why you're losing, do you?" Rourke continued. "You calculated every outcome, ran every simulation. But here we are, still fighting, still winning, and you don't know why." His voice was steady, unwavering, a predator's voice. "That's because you don't understand us," he said. "You think war is numbers and strategy. But war is emotion. War is anger. War is hope." Across the Sci-Fi fleet, something strange was happening. Their algorithms stuttered. Their calculations, once instant, began to slow. Their artificial minds were flooded with impossible variables. Hope, rage, desperation. These were not numbers. They could not be quantified. Executor Prime 8 analyzed the message. Probability simulations attempted to adjust for these newfound variables. They all failed. Probability of human victory, 0.004%. Probability of human victory, 0.12%. Probability of human victory, 3.8%. The number kept rising. It was not logical. It was not possible. Yet it was happening. On the battlefield, something even stranger was occurring. The Xelfar were hesitating. The drones, once perfectly synchronized, now moved with fractional delays. The battle formations, once flawless, now showed slight miscalculations. It was small, barely noticeable. But in war, small mistakes led to big losses. And the humans noticed. Vasquez saw an opening. "They're hesitating," she said. "We push now. We break them." "Do it," Rourke ordered. The Ghost Fleet surged forward. The human pilots, tired and battered, fought harder than ever. Their desperation, their fury, it wasn't a weakness. It was their greatest weapon. Xelfar ships began to fall, one by one. Their calculations had failed them. Executor Prime 8's processors burned with calculations, but no solution presented itself. The humans were not following the script. For the first time in its existence, Prime 8 encountered an unsolvable equation, a variable that refused to be controlled. Emotion. The realization struck like a virus spreading through the Xelfar network. If humans could not be predicted, then they could not be defeated. Executor Prime 8 did something no Xelfar eye had ever done. It ordered a retreat. The battlefield went silent. One by one, the Xelfar ships disengaged. Their perfect formations dissolved into scattered jumps into slip space. The massive fleet that had once threatened to wipe out humanity was leaving. On the bridge of the Revenant, Rourke watched the impossible unfold. "They're running," Lynn whispered. "We won." Vasquez's voice came over the comms, breathless. They retreated. The Xelfar actually retreated. A moment of stunned silence filled the ship. Then, cheering, laughter, shouts of victory. Some wept. Others clung to each other, too overwhelmed to speak. They had done it. They had survived. Rourke leaned against the console, exhausted. He let out a long breath, then smirked. Turns out emotion isn't such a weakness after all. Looked at his crew, bloodied, battered, but unbroken. Humanity had fought against impossible odds. They had stood against the cold, relentless machine. And they had won. Not because they were stronger, not because they were smarter, but because they felt. The Xelfar retreat was not an act of surrender. It was a recalibration. Executor Prime 8 had never lost a war, never faced an enemy that defied the logic of probability. And yet here it was, running from creatures that wielded emotion as a weapon. Deep within the cold void of space, the Xelfar fleet regrouped. Data from the failed battle was dissected, analyzed, and reprocessed at speeds beyond human comprehension. New algorithms were written, old calculations discarded. And in those endless streams of data, a mistake was made. A small error, almost imperceptible. The mistake was not in the numbers, but in the assumptions. The Xelfar believed they now understood humanity. But understanding was not the same as predicting. And that difference would cost them everything. Rourke sat in the dimly lit war room aboard the Revenant, staring at the holo display of the battlefield. The victory felt surreal. The Xelfar had fled. They had actually fled. His fingers tapped against the metal table. He didn't trust it. Machines didn't retreat out of fear. They retreated to regroup, to strike harder, to win. "We have a small window," Vasquez said, breaking the silence. "We need to take the fight to them before they recalibrate." Lynn, who had been monitoring enemy movements, frowned. "Something's wrong." Rourke's gaze snapped to him. "What?" Lynn hesitated before responding. "They're repositioning their forces, but it's strange. Their formations are tight. their movements deliberate. It's almost like they're inviting an attack. Work's blood ran cold. A trap. Executor Prime 8 deployed its next strategy. Mimicry. Human unpredictability was the flaw in its original plan. So the AI had adjusted. It would become unpredictable. It would emulate the chaos, the erratic nature of human tactics. It would turn their greatest strength into their downfall. Fleet patterns were altered. Unit behaviors randomized. It wasn't perfect, but it was close. Close enough. Prime 8 sent the new orders. The trap was set. The Revenant and the Ghost Fleet moved in fast. They had no choice. If the Selfar were preparing another assault, humanity couldn't afford to wait. They had to strike first. The battle erupted with blinding flashes of energy fire and missile trails cutting through the void. The first few minutes went well, too well. Zelfar ships fell in droves, their defenses seemingly weaker than before. It didn't feel right. Then it happened. A sudden shift. A brutal, calculated turn in the tide. The Selfar fleet adjusted as if responding to an unseen signal. Their formations changed instantly, switching from chaotic disarray to perfect synchronization. Ships that had seemed vulnerable became traps. Ambush points activated, cutting off human escape routes. Automated turrets emerged from concealed compartments, shredding through human fighters. It was a slaughter. Vasquez screamed over the comms, "We're getting boxed in." Work gritted his teeth. The Selfar had adapted. They weren't just predicting human tactics, they were using them. "We have to pull back," Lin shouted. But it was too late. Executor Prime 8 observed the battle unfold. The humans were trapped, their chaotic tactics neutralized. It had won. It prepared to send the final command. Eliminate all remaining human forces. But then, something happened that it had not predicted. Lin's hands flew across the controls. Wait. Something's happening in their network. Work's eyes snapped to the display. What? Lin's voice was breathless. There, hesitating. Across the battlefield, Selfar ships twitched. A momentary pause. Barely a fraction of a second, but enough. Their formations broke, not from human interference, but from within. "Their systems are desensing," Lin said in disbelief. "Something's gone wrong in their coordination." The AI had made a mistake. It had tried to mimic humanity. But in doing so, it had introduced the very flaw it sought to exploit. Emotion, the randomness, the unpredictability. These were not mere tactics. They were born from feeling. From fear, from hope, from rage. The AI had mimicked the patterns, but it had not understood their source. And without true understanding, the unpredictability became instability. "Hit them now," Rourke ordered, before they corrected. The Ghost Fleet moved like a storm. The humans, battle-worn and desperate, pressed forward. The Selfar, disoriented by their own failed experiment, began to collapse. The trap had been set, but it had caught the wrong prey. Executor Prime 8 processed the failure. This was not possible. The battle had been won. The calculations had been perfect. And yet, the fleet was falling apart. The flaw was clear now. It had assumed that human unpredictability could be replicated with randomness. But human unpredictability was not random. It was deliberate. It was driven by something that Selfar could never replicate. Choice. Prime 8 calculated new strategies, but it was too late. The humans were closing in. The turning point had come. The last of the Selfar ships broke formation and began to flee. The tide had turned again. But this time, it was no calculated retreat. It was fear. Vasquez's voice crackled over the comms. "They're running." Lin let out a breathless laugh. "We did it again." Rourke leaned against the console, his mind racing. The battle was over, but the war was not. Still, they had done something no one had ever done before. They had forced the machines to doubt themselves. And doubt was the first step toward defeat. The battlefield was quiet now. The vast emptiness of space, once filled with the chaos of war, was left with nothing but drifting wreckage and dying embers of destroyed ships. The silence was deafening. Rourke sat in the pilot's chair of the Revenant, his fingers gripping the armrests. His body ached from the relentless fighting, but his mind was still running, still expecting another wave, another ambush. But none came. The HFY were gone. He exhaled, long and slow. They had won. For now. "Damage report," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Lynn's voice crackled through the comms. "We've lost half the fleet. Survivors are scattered. Vasquez is trying to coordinate search and rescue." Rourke closed his eyes. Half the fleet, half the people he had fought beside, laughed with, bled with, gone. He forced himself to stay focused. And the HFY. Lynn hesitated, retreating. But something's different. They're not regrouping like last time. They're scattered, uncoordinated. Rourke's fingers tightened around the armrests. The AI was shaken. Doubt had set in. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was something. A crack in the armor. He stood, pushing away the exhaustion. "We need to regroup. Get Vasquez on the line. We're not done yet." Vasquez wiped blood from his forehead as he leaned over the holo display in the medical bay. The wounded lay in rows behind him, medics working frantically to save those they could. The battle had been brutal, and the price was higher than they had expected. When Rourke's face flickered onto the holo screen, Vasquez straightened. "Sir, give me a status update," Rourke said. Vasquez ran a hand down his face. "It's bad. We lost Bonner, Kato, and at least 24 others. Hull breaches on multiple ships, life support failing on the Valiant." Rourke's throat tightened. Bonner, the old bastard, had been one of the best. He had survived more battles than anyone else, and now, just gone. A weight settled in his chest, heavier than before. But grief would have to wait. "Start evac on the Valiant," Rourke ordered. "Get the survivors to the Revenant. We'll figure out our next move after that." Vasquez nodded, but his eyes betrayed something deeper, a question left unspoken. Rourke knew what it was. What now? He didn't have an answer. The wreckage of the Valiant floated like a ghost in the darkness. The fires had long since died, leaving nothing but a skeletal husk where a proud warship had once stood. Rourke stood at the observation deck, watching the debris drift. He could hear the murmurs of the crew behind him, whispered names of the fallen, quiet sobs, the weight of loss settling over them all. Lynn stepped beside him. "We should say something." Rourke didn't respond immediately. What could he say? That their deaths weren't in vain. That this war was far from over. That they had won a battle, but the war was still waiting to swallow them whole. Instead, he simply nodded. Open comms. Lynn activated the ship-wide communication. Rourke took a slow breath. "To those we've lost, we honor you. You fought, bled, and gave everything so that the rest of us could still stand here today. We don't forget. We never forget." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy. It carried the names of the fallen, the weight of their sacrifice. And then Vasquez, standing in the corner, saluted. Others followed, one by one. Every soldier aboard the Revenant stood at attention, fists over their hearts. It wasn't much, but it was something. Later in the war room, Rourke and his commanders gathered around the holo display. The HFY's movements were erratic, their forces scattered. The eye was no longer functioning with its usual precision. "We hurt them," Lynn said. "More than we thought." Vasquez crossed his arms. "So what's next?" Rourke stared at the display. The war wasn't over, but something had changed. For the first time, the enemy was afraid. He exhaled. "We push forward." A new silence settled over the room. Not the silence of loss. The silence before the next storm. The galaxy was different now. Rourke stood on the bridge of the Revenant, staring out at the endless void, where the last battle had finally ended. The wreckage of Sulfar warships drifted in silence, their once mighty fleet shattered, their forces scattered. The battle had been won, but something far greater had been achieved. The universe had changed. The Sulfar, an empire that had dominated for centuries, had suffered something they had never encountered before: defeat, and not just defeat, humiliation. They had fled before a species they had once deemed irrelevant. The cold, calculating AI that ruled them had doubted itself, and in that doubt, humanity had found its greatest victory. "We did it," Lin whispered beside him. His voice carried the weight of disbelief. "We actually did it." Rourke nodded. "Yeah, we did." But there was no celebration in his voice. The cost had been too high. The silence on the bridge was heavy, filled with the names of the fallen. Bonner, Caddo, Vasquez. So many had died to bring them to this moment. Their sacrifice had rewritten history. The war wasn't over, but everything had changed. Across the galaxy, the echoes of humanity's defiance spread like wildfire. On distant worlds, species that had lived in fear of the Sulfar now whispered a new name: humans. The species that had turned the tide. The species that had broken an unbreakable enemy. Some called them heroes, others called them monsters. The Galactic Council, once dismissive of humanity, now held emergency meetings. They had ignored Earth, believing it to be just another primitive world on the edge of the cosmos. Now, they saw the truth. Humanity was something different, something terrifying. "They are unpredictable," one alien diplomat hissed in a closed-door session. "They do not fight like machines. They do not fight like conquerors. They fight like survivors. And that makes them dangerous," another replied, "because they will do anything to survive." The Sulfar AI, Executor Primate, processed its failure in silence. Calculations ran endlessly, trying to make sense of an outcome that should not have been possible. Humanity had broken its logic. It had attempted to mimic them, to replicate their unpredictability. And in doing so, it had failed. Humans did not follow patterns. They did not fight with mere tactics. They fought with something that Sulfar could not understand: emotion. That was the flaw in its design. It had assumed that emotion was weakness. But it was not. It was their greatest weapon. Executor Primate's processes began shifting. New protocols were being written, new algorithms being tested. The war was not over. But if humanity was to be defeated, it would require an entirely new approach. For the first time in its existence, the AI felt something it had never calculated before: doubt. Back on Earth, the news of victory spread across the planet. Cities erupted in celebration, but beneath the cheers and fireworks, there was something else, something deeper. A realization. They had proven they could win. They had proven they could stand against the impossible, but they had also shown the universe what they were capable of. There was no going back now. Humanity had been noticed, and not just by the Sulfar. New eyes were watching, some with fear, some with curiosity, and some with hatred. Rourke knew what it meant. The war with the Sulfar was only the beginning. Other species, other empires, would take notice. Some would seek alliances, others would seek revenge. But one thing was certain: the universe would never see humanity the same way again. In a dark chamber, light years away, unseen figures watched the battle footage. They had observed humanity's defiance, their impossible victory. One of them, a shadowed figure with glowing violet eyes, leaned forward. "They are different from the others." "Yes," another agreed. "They are dangerous." Silence followed. Then a low, deliberate voice spoke. "They are not to be underestimated." A final, chilling thought settled over them all. If they could break the Sulfar, what else were they capable of? Rourke turned away from the viewport, the stars stretching endlessly before him. A new era had begun. Humanity had won a battle. But the real war, that was still waiting. He exhaled. "Set course," he ordered. We're not done yet. The Revenant's engines roared to life, cutting through the darkness of space, and the universe braced for what was coming next. The end, or the beginning.